for everybody connecting here. Thank you so much for being so active in the conversation before. I saw a lot of comments in there. I try to bring some of those questions to the panelists, but of course, I see a lot of interaction among yourselves. So please keep it up, keep it coming, keep having the conversations with your fellow participants to this panel. Then that way we can, not only learn from the panelists, but also learn from each other and connect with each other. So Minola, I'm going to welcome you to the panel. We're still missing a couple of panelists, but hello, how are you?
Hi, Enrique. Happy to be here. How are you?
Good, thank you. How's everything going?
Good. We have a first sunny day after a handful of rainy days here in Basel in Switzerland. So we made it through with cheese and chocolate.
Well, that is awesome. I hope you enjoy the sun as soon as this is over. Thank you so much. And I'm going to welcome Artie. And hello.
Hi, how are
How are
you?
you? How are
Good,
you?
how are you? Yeah, very good. Thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. Well, this will become more of a fireside chat, it seems, because we are still missing both Felicia and Raji, and I am hoping that they can connect. But Minola, I'm going to let you go. And if it ends up being a little bit less time than the full hour of the panel, that's totally fine. We will just, roll with it. I am hoping that they both connect, but we're just going to roll with it, all right? So have a wonderful conversation that seems to turn into a fireside chat. So let's just take it from there. Minola, I'm gonna be in the background if you need me. All right.
Yes, thank you so very much. Hello, Artie, and hello, and good moment of the day you're all experiencing on your time zones. Always a pleasure to be part of the Hacking HR events. As Enrique mentioned, my name is Minola. I am a journalist by trade, a change manager by choice, and an absolute Hacking HR supporter by calling. And it's such a joy and such a privilege to be part of any and all Hacking HR conversations. Now, Artie, keeping fingers crossed and hoping that Felicia or Raji will be able to join us soon. If no, we will just take it from here. Let's just kick it off with an Enrique signature move with a personal spin to it. So if you can just give us a short introduction of yourself and also tell us a little bit about the perspective that you bring into the conversation today.
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. Similar to what Minala said, a good moment to you. I like that you said that actually, because I was thinking, well, it's the end of the day almost for me, similar to you, Minala. But for others, I recognize that this is just the start. So my name is Arti Kashyap Ainsley, and I'm the Global Head of Health and Wellbeing for the Ocado Group. I like, Minola, how you did your introduction, and I wish that I could almost emulate the what I do by choice, by trade, and that used to be sort of my thing. But I guess to give you a bit of context to my background is I've spent the majority of my career, so 15 to 16 years in the professional services industry. I am an accountant by trade. I was a lifelong consultant following that. And after having the experiences that I had in that workforce, I switched paths to well-being and a few years ago was leading Deloitte Consulting in the UK from a well-being perspective. And then I went on a little break called maternity leave, had a baby, and decided to, at that point, follow my calling, which is the point of view I think I like to bring to the conversation today around well-being in the workplace and where that kind of sits. And that's what has landed me in the role that I am currently in today.
Thank you so very much. Now, I was before jumping on the link, I was looking at my notes from the panels of yesterday and today, and it's so comforting and healing and hopeful to hear people say, be human and show grace and nurture conversations. But at the same time, if we look at what we hear around us, we do hear about the post-pandemic reality and the burnout epidemic and the great resignation and war for talent is back with us, and hybrid environment. Now, having all these words and all these competing realities in mind as lenses, how would you start the conversation about well-being and wellness and mental health, and link it to the business agenda?
Yeah, it's interesting because actually everything you've mentioned is something that I've done today at some point. So I've hit on things around the Great Resignation. I've hit on things around burnout, which obviously a lot of organizations are starting to see. Definitely, we've been talking about human leadership and what that looks like today. So it's almost like you've had a view of my diary. And I think that all the things you said lean into the fact that actually you can't ignore the well-being conversation, and with that the construct of mental health. Obviously it's a big component of well-being, and I think 5-6 years ago where we were compared to what the pandemic has allowed us to achieve in terms of bringing the conversation forward is that it's only highlighted it, right? Like, I think I can bring up some materials. Actually, I'm working on business case slides at the moment, and it's all around that idea and that construct of the fact that we can't ignore that it's a part of everything that we do, right? Like, if you think about and you step back and look at the idea of human leadership, we were talking about it today, it's recognizing that when people come to work, they're not just employees that are doing tasks, but actually they're humans that are coming in, and they're humans that are dealing with very real challenges, whether it's, financial challenges at home, or legal implications, or relationship breakdowns, mental health challenges, physical health challenges. These are all things that are going on for our people on a day in, day out basis. They don't come into the office or into the virtual hybrid office and check all of those things. They come in and they're penetrating their minds. They're keeping them occupied. They are definitely building into how they deliver in a day. So we can't really ignore those kinds of things, right? And I think, if anything, COVID's kind of highlighted that, because during the pandemic, you saw things like, hi, Felicia.
Hey, Felicia.
You saw an opening into people's homes, right? We met people's kids, we met people's pets. I think that there's no real sense of how to bring the conversation in. It's how to keep the conversation going, which I think is the most important thing that we have to probably look at today more than anything.
Thank you. Welcome, Felicia. And we will just take a half a step back. And Felicia, we would love to welcome you into our conversation. And if we can take a couple of minutes for you just to give us a short introduction of yourself, and also a little bit about the perspective that you bring into the conversation today. And then I will re-raise the question that we were trying to answer, and give an outline and some inspiration. So please, the e-mic is all yours, Felicia.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Felicia Leko Salami, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead at the Bay and Hudson's Bay here in Canada. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation because I feel, or I know, in fact, just from relating to people and helping businesses grow, that, it's all connected. Wellness, well-being, business success. You couldn't be successful without a healthy and complete workforce. So I think it's a very relevant topic to the times that we're in now. Especially, I think I heard Hattie speaking about the effects of the pandemic and COVID, makes it even more relevant to be helping businesses understand where this connection can help the growth and stability of organizations. So something I'm excited to be speaking to, and I'm looking forward to the session with yourself and Natty.
Thank you, Felicia. And we were just starting our sense making and connection journey, and we were looking at our reality where we are surrounded by, be human and grace and compassion, but also, the burnout epidemic and hybrid environment and the great resignation and the war for talent. And we were starting to talk about how do we create, and Arti was making the case for continuing the conversation about wellness and well-being with the underlying mental health topic. How do we create this conversation within the business environment?
I think creating the conversation is linked to is on how we can express and link it to the imperative of this being an element of business success. So I like to look at well-being as complete. So if you think about physical, intellectual, social, mental health, it brings it all together. And so at the end of the day, if your body isn't complete and optimal, you're not going to function properly. And same applies to businesses. So if we're not concerned, if we don't have a well-being strategy and we're not concerned about the mental health of our people or their physical wellness or their intellectual growth, which is what gives them a sense of thriving, then at the end of the day, we're either going to have people look for better options and leave, great resignation, or we're going to have people not bring their best self to work, and then they do half work, or they don't do great work. And when they don't do great work, then the business doesn't is not productive. When the business is not productive, the business is not profitable. When the business is not profitable, then there's no company, and then there are no people, right? So I like to look at it from that angle, as to the connection, but then also as to educating the leaders. So I guess that's where your question was: how do you have this conversation? I think for most leaders, they're always looking at numbers. How does it affect my bottom line? So yeah, you show them this is how it affects your bottom line. If we don't do X, Y, Z, or if we don't build an environment that encourages growth and belonging, then we won't have numbers to look at, or we will have numbers that we won't be smiling about, right? So I think that's, for me, even from past experience, that's the easiest way to get leaders on your side. Show them the numbers and how, it affects positive or negative.
I think leading on from that, one thing I'll add is this idea, like we've been talking today about human leadership, and the organization that I work for, we are very heavily IQ driven versus EQ. So our leaders are really capable, very strong intellectually, but they definitely, I don't want to say lack is not the right terminology. They just tend to lean more into their IQ than they had their EQ. And that is a bit of a challenge when it comes to things like this idea of human leadership and, what it feels like to step back and actually look at our staff as more than just the individual that they are. And I think in some of those conversations, I think there's an element of two things. One is, there's three things. I think to Felicia's point, exactly that, showing them the numbers, because that plays to their IQ strengths of helping them really get their head wrapped around the cost of not really actually looking at it and the imperative of having to. The second is around actually giving them space to understand what it means to be a leader today. So the thing that we talked about today at work was the idea that like 10, 15 years ago, what a leader looked like is very different than what it looks like today. And I don't mean from a physicality perspective. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you made it to a leadership level based on your technical expertise, right? You were very good at delegating and producing. Now, to produce or to become a leader, it means something a lot more. It's less so much about your technical abilities and more about the pastoral and inspirational elements that you provide in your role. And I think there's an element of providing that construct and giving them a lens of, if I'm going to be a leader and a successful leader, this is how my role needs to evolve and what it needs to look like. And then I think the last bit is around creating this space, right? Because I think then leading on to it is a lot of leaders today, having come from an era or a time, or they don't necessarily have the skill set and self-awareness to really understand what well-being looks like for them, first of all, right? Like I saw it so much in my experiences at Deloitte and partners that were like sitting there thinking like, I've just gone through the organization for 20, 25 years and I've gotten to the top and I just kind of just like sucked it up and got it done with. But now I'm here and someone's asking me what it looks and feels like to feel happy at work and what stress looks like to me and all these questions. And I've never actually taken a lens of it for myself. And so I think there is something in that discussion of actually holding up the mirror. I think there's a really big construct to roles like mine and Felicia's, where a big part of our capability is being able to hold that mirror up and allow the vulnerability to come out versus it being a forced, you have to do this because you're of a certain level in stature. More than anything.
Yeah, and you say that so well, because I mean, I speak about something I call the talk-do ratio, where a lot of leaders say things, but they don't do those things. And like you said, the composition of the workforce today is completely different from 10 or 15 years ago. Even think about Gen Zs and their expectations and the things that they're looking out for. It's not all about money and high pay today. It's about that completeness and that wholeness. So you want to be in a place that you can trust, in a place where you feel safe, in a place where you feel like you can share. And I think there's a lot of data out there that shows that for companies that don't pay attention to these things, there's a 50% reduction in turnover risk. There's 56% increase in performance when you pay attention to them. There's 75% reduction in employee sick days when you pay attention to these things, because then people are happy to come to work, right? Or people are happy to be part of a team. And I think one of the most alarming stats that I've seen is 167% more likely to be an organizational promoter. And that's what you want. You want champions within your organization that would refer and recommend and promote the brand, whether internally or externally, because that's where you start having that attraction to your brand. You're gaining great talent, and that all leads back to that productivity profitability equation. So I think the more we keep this conversation going, and leaders understand that they have a role to play, and that we all understand that we're accountable for these things to happen within our organization, the better for us all. Yeah.
I keep hearing several agendas being mentioned, and they almost feel concutting and separate. So we speak about the business agenda, we speak about the digital agenda, we speak about the HR agenda, the DEI agenda. Where would you place well-being and wellness amongst all these agendas, and why?
I mean, I'm happy to go first, but I feel like my view was, so, as I said in the beginning in my introduction, my background is in consulting. So I lived and breathed the environment. I was a practitioner in that environment, and I kind of grew up through it. And when I switched into looking at well-being for the practice, I really started to get to this view of it's not to your point, it's not a separate agenda. It's not a program. I really, really have an adverse reaction when I hear a well-being program. It's not a program. So you are definitely speaking to my ears, Manila, and asking the question, because the reality is I can throw at you loads of mindfulness and yoga classes and extra things alike, which is what a lot of people think well-being is. It used to be fruit in offices, but actually that doesn't fundamentally change what work looks like on a day-to-day basis for me. All they are really nice add-ons and nothing more beyond that. And so for me, it's not about, sorry, I seem to have a frog in my throat. It's not about having this separate conversation. I think the separate conversation is needed to raise the awareness, but where it should be and where it should live is in the day-to-day. So it should feel like well-being to me at work is I come to work every day as an employee and I feel like I'm in a psychologically safe environment. It feels like if I want to open up and talk about anything I need to, I have the people that I can do that with. And I don't feel like there's a stigma. I don't feel this thing that it's going to come back and negatively impact me because I've shared something very open. I also feel like I have the flexibility and autonomy to set my boundaries. And to work in a way that works for me, but also to own them and set the example. And I have role models around me. And overall, I feel like I'm thriving. That for me is separate to a yoga class or a mindfulness class. For me, I come in and that's what my working environment feels like every day. So I think there's an agenda in terms of there's a reason to have a conversation around this wider topic. But where it sits is actually in the day-to-day operations. And the whole point of having this elevated conversation is so that leaders and managers feel like they have the skills and the knowledge about themselves, as well as their teams, to actually live and breathe that every day with them all day, because that's where the impact is really feeling like it does. All the extra stuff is just there, and it adds to the culture of the business, but it's not the what's the everyday for me.
Yeah, and that's the level that I think organizations need to get to, where it becomes organic and it's part of the day to day. I like the way that you say it. It's not one department's agenda; it's an organizational agenda, if you like, because it affects everybody. I mean, it's not just about the associates, it's also about the leaders, it's about the whole organization where you're going. And I think to make it also very natural, it has to be not something that is told, it's something that is cultivated. So when you start looking at the culture of the business, what are the elements that we're feeding that culture to ensure, the foundational pieces are there, and well-being is a sustainable piece within the organization. I always say that you can have the best strategy in the world. So be it you want to call it a well-being strategy, or I think you talked about well-being program. But then if you don't have the right culture, it will eat that strategy up for breakfast, is what I say. So sometimes we need to step back and say, why are we even doing this, right? And go back to the foundations to ensure that we're building environment, processes, policies, programs, whatever you call it within your organization, that will enable this day to day. It's a lifestyle, but to your point, Ati, we don't get there until we equip our people as well. So think about the leaders. How well are they equipped to have uncomfortable conversations? Are they trained to give their team psychological safety? Are they vulnerable enough for people to feel like they can share within their team? Is the company in itself encouraging connections if outside of your business unit, so that people can feel community and family? And that's when people get to that level where they truly can share personal stuff. They truly can feel like my not necessarily that my problems are your problems, but that I can share what I struggle with and I can find help. And when people have that sense of being able to find help, then, like I said, they do their best work. And when they do their best work, they will thrive. A lot of people leave organizations because they don't feel a sense of progression sometimes. Not necessarily the people that are just coming in, but the people in the middle point. I've seen results of surveys that show that a lot of people from like the 3+ year mark feel like they're not invested in a lot. So maybe the company's paying attention to new hires or top talent, or one of these subgroups that after a few years they feel like, I haven't even done any personal development or professional development cost. Does this company even care about me? What have I done in the last 5 years? And then they start looking out for options. What are the other organizations that can offer me more? And you don't want to be that company where people are thinking that way. But it just doesn't happen overnight. You have to own the fact that this is an important element in business success.
This conversation is totally music to my ears, and I would need your help to make it a little bit more actionable and go a little bit deeper on something that both of you mentioned, like well-being and wellness is not a one-off program.
Yeah.
What are some practical tools, some practical steps, some practical tips and tricks that you can share with the audience on how to make wellness and well-being a sustainable, ongoing focus, and not, package it as a program or as a bullet point on a seasonal agenda?
Do you want to go, or do you want me to go?
Oh, why don't you go first? I was like pausing, so I didn't jump in. So you go first.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and that's a good point to raise. I mean, at the end of the day, you just don't want to dish out, do this, do this, do that to people. You want people to, like I said earlier, organically or naturally be this person who, in conjunction with the next person and the next person and the next person, form a community that enables or allows for this to happen. So I will start with the fact that the first strategy will be around education. So, I mean, a lot of these things that we're speaking about is somehow new to a lot of people and even to a lot of leaders. New, maybe not in the sense of them having not heard it, but not feeling equipped, right? So there's a lot of education that will go around to get leaders to the level where, as we said before, they can breed teams, or they can cultivate teams, or grow teams that feel safe and all of that. But then also another strategy will be to ensure that we can celebrate the benefits with ourselves. So when I say celebrate the benefits, if we have tried, maybe one team has tried something and it's helping them, being able to share with other teams and celebrating that will get more people to be interested in the conversation, or even in the actions of, or the consciousness of, being that person that we're painting here. The other piece will be around, having that enabling environment. So you can say that you care about wellness and well-being, but then you're encouraging or allowing your leaders to book time over lunch break, or contact their staff after work hours. So I think as an organization, you need to own the responsibility, and everybody needs to be clear about things that might seem as simple as that. And the final strategy will be to encourage everyone to lead and live by example. So if, for example, we're preaching all this well-being tactics or things to do, but then the leaders of the organization themselves don't show that, then it goes back to that talk to ratio. People are just going to be disconnected and say, oh, this is all performative. You're just saying it because every company is talking about well-being. So you don't want that to be the case as well. And I put that in as a strategy because you want to have a strategy that works and is sustainable. So if those foundational pieces, education and leading by example, are not in place, you would find that you can make some temporary success, but then go down 3-5 years, you're back to square one, right? So yeah, those are the few that I will drop there. Ati, what do you think?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely agree with you on your points. I like the thing around booking, when people book time over lunches and stuff, and this idea of like people do what they say. People don't do what they sorry. People do what they see, not what you say, basically, and they follow that correlation, right? I think for me, some of the tangible things are almost like a bit basic. It might feel like almost very far removed from actually what you need to do from a strategy perspective. I think there's a couple of things. One, I think there's a thing of just understanding who your stakeholders are in the business. So I think there's also a whole debate on the fact that well-being often sits in a people function, and therefore then it's understanding how you successfully partner with the business. And who those stakeholders are that you need to partner with, so that it does get on a more strategic agenda and is not just seen as something that, HR does to the business, versus it's something that they do with the business. And that's kind of the language you want to frame, right? So who are those stakeholders? How do you build those relationships with them and spend the time with them? And what are the things then that you need to present to them to be able to bring them on course with you, right? So is it, bringing them the business case and the statistics around it and showing them sort of the cost and benefit analysis of it? Is it showing them what you can tangibly do? Is it, what is it essentially, and bringing that more to life? So I think there's something around your stakeholders. I definitely think there's something around getting a broader understanding of well-being. So in a lot of organizations, well-being will equal mental health. And I'm definitely not negating the importance of mental health because it's massive. But I think, Felicia, you definitely touched on it at the beginning, which is well-being is more holistic. It includes things like your physical health, your mental health. There's the way that I'll define it is physical and mental health, the sense of purpose and meaning, and then your overall environment, right? Which goes to the foundations of everything that kind of sits in the construct of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it comes down to ideas of financial well-being, social well-being. It kind of connects all those constructs. And so I think even as someone that's leading on this agenda or wants to start the conversation, I think there's an element of understanding that gamut so that you can then provide a holistic view to the organization. It helps for you to be more inclusive and to also understand more about what everybody else or how everybody else could engage with the topic. And then I think the third one, and it's quite interesting given that, Felicia and I are on this call together, but I think it's really important to understand the intersectionalities of the conversation, right? So well-being, like as we said, isn't a standalone and should be something that's definitely embedded into the business. But equally, what it is, it's also something that's very closely linked to inclusion. I don't think you can have one conversation without the other. And the other thing that's gaining a lot more importance is the idea of the ESG framework and where that kind of sits within the broader context of ESG. And then therefore, depending on your business, it's this idea of, investors and understanding the investor side of it versus your external stakeholders, clients, suppliers, all of their standpoints of it. And I think it's looking at that overall viewpoint to get a sense of how you then connect the conversation. And therefore, then with the stakeholders you have and your holistic view of it, you can have a much more powerful conversation when you do start to broach these topics with people at work.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think that identifying your stakeholders is a very primary part of that conversation. And I like the way you bring in inclusion, because at the end of the day, I always say that it's the equity and inclusion equals diversity and belonging. Diversity and belonging being the outcomes. But at the end of the day, if you don't balance out equity and inclusion within your processes or environment, then you will never get that outcome, right?
Yeah.
And belonging, I'm finding it's one part of the DIB acronym that people have not really gotten very comfortable with, because we're all not there yet. We're on this journey to get there. But there's so much power in that, because I like how you brought in the Maslow hierarchy of needs, because if you think about things like exclusion or microaggressions, it goes then to that bottom where what's our basic physical needs or emotional needs. These things have a part to play there. I always say to people that, when you think about exclusion, you just think, oh, it's a word that we use in the opposite of inclusion, but it actually signals pain, and I think there's some science around that, where when people feel excluded, they feel pain. And when they feel pain, they get disconnected. When they get disconnected, I mean, we're not even having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's all connected. And truly having maybe the people function drive it, but ensuring that every stakeholder is involved, so it truly becomes a holistic push throughout the organization. It makes a lot of difference.
I would like to bring the lens of business outcomes back into the conversation, and it might just be me, but any conversation around business outcomes and business results comes down to some sort of metrics. When we speak about wellness and well-being, what metrics would you refer to?
I mean, I feel like that's unless Felicia, you've cracked it. And I could see you putting my massive foot in my mouth, but I feel like that is the hard one. I think for me, when I started in my role, I was like, I need to understand the KPIs of this business, because I am so keen to take, I'm an ex-accountant. So like for me, I'm like, give me the numbers. That's what I need to see, right? So I'm like, I would love to take a KPI that the business has that they measure success on and be able to layer something around well-being in it. Is it sickness, absence? Is it, I don't know, the types of illnesses. I don't know. Like what is it that I need to take? And the reality is that that's really hard to do, especially because, as we notoriously know, most organizations don't have good data. I mean, I worked for a consulting firm and we helped businesses get better data, but then equally we didn't have great data. So it's that view of, data is messy. You don't always have a great picture. And we at the organization I'm at currently, we are just the brink of trying to clean up all of the data and even get a better picture of it. So that's really been hard. I think the other thing is So if one, we take the idea that data is not necessarily readily available, that's a really hard thing to find the metric. I think the other thing is metrics that people often go to are things like sickness absence data. So it's like number of days sick, but that's laced with so much subjectivity because it's dependent on what people choose to select and report. It's also reliant on the categories, right? So like, I mean, most times mental health related absences will fall under the other category, but other category can mean anything from like a toenail infection to I hurt my arm and I just don't know what else doesn't fit into another category to I obviously am struggling from a mental health perspective. So it can mean so many things. And therefore, then if I pull a number from there, is that really fully representative or is it not? And then I think there's other elements like we definitely look at and rely heavily on our engagement survey, which we do quite frequently. And I think a lot of organizations will do that. That equally, while I think it's great and provides great insight, the challenge with that is that oftentimes the people that fill those out are the people that are looking for a place to really have their voices heard. And oftentimes that's not necessarily the most positive thing. I mean, you obviously get really positive feedback, but oftentimes it is heavily skewed in one way or the other. It's not to say that we haven't been able to get great data from it, but that's typically where we've had to rely more on. That's kind of just been the experience that I've had with data. So I guess the short answer is it's a really hard one. I've also had to, the last one I'll throw in is I've had to rely on vendor data. So looking at things like what our EAP provides us or what occupational health or some of the other providers give us, that gives us a bit of an insight, but it's a bit of a messy place. I'm very open to learning from anyone else that seems to feel like they've cracked it because I think there's so many different ways that you can do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I like what Minola says about not everything that can be counted matters, and not all that matters can be counted at the end of the day. So for me, I think it's the balance between quantitative and qualitative. What's that narrative coming through engagement survey where you have it? But to your point, even the engagement survey can be skewed depending on when or how or what the objective for filling it is. What I'm finding as workaround strategies or tips for things like that is to have more pulse surveys, which is very unexpected and just feels the pulse of people at random times. And most organizations that now have like good platforms like maybe Unily or some other type of providers have ability to do that. So it could be a Wednesday afternoon and you want to say how you're feeling today. And, multiple people in the organization speak from a place of spontaneity, which is actually more sincere, I would say, and not kind of like shrouded around, this is a survey that you have to fill in 2 weeks. We're doing this because of X, Y, Z. So I'm finding that having those type of informal touch points to gather information is helpful. One. Two, I think you spoke to the fact that, standard metrics that people would look at will be like sick days and stuff like that. But I think the more we, delve into the data and look at turnover and retention data from another layer, we look at things like exit interviews or even welcome interviews, would help us piece the narrative together so that at the end of the day, it's not just about those ad numbers, it's also about qualitatively, what are we getting from the people, or what are we feeling as an organization? I think always having that balance makes a whole lot of difference, because sometimes you can look at a number and it says, 50% less turnover, but then you speak to people and it doesn't really match, right? So I think being able to measure in those two streams, it will always makes a difference.
I think the other thing is, sorry, I just point out, and I think Felicia, you hit it on the head. Like, I think there's a level of like, qualitative says so much more than the quantitative does. The other thing I'd say is that oftentimes when we create a space where people can openly talk about their well-being, metrics like sickness data aren't necessarily the thing that are going to tell you that you're doing a good job, because ultimately, instead of decreasing, it's likely to increase because people are feeling like they have the permission to more openly discuss and or broach the topic. So it is something where I don't necessarily think you're going to get a decrease. I think sometimes it works in the opposite way, given what you're trying to do, which is to create this environment where people feel like they can really be open about what they're feeling and experiencing.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm finding that there's so many tools out there now that, you can kind of like adapt to what your own culture or what your own organizational structure is.
Mhm.
There's a good one that I found. It's from Forte. I think it's called the DIB listening. So at the end of the day, it helps to ensure that you're listening and you're listening and acting to that, as opposed to you're just trying to do all these multiple things that might not necessarily be right for your organization, but maybe you found it was nice for another organization. So I think
Mhm.
the first thing is understanding the DNA of who your company is, the people are, what we're trying to achieve, what kind of culture we're trying to breed, because every company is different at the end of the day, right?
Hmm. I love that you mentioned, Felicia, you mentioned narratives, and Artie, you mentioned conversation spaces. And there's a wonderful, wonderful quote from the head of strategic foresight with OECD, and I've been using it in change conversations very, very often lately. And it says that you manage by numbers, but you lead with narratives.
Mm.
And that's quite a powerful statement. Now, we alluded on this next topic a little bit when we talked about how especially the hybrid environment blurs the boundaries between home and work and private life and professional life. um, how would you expand the scope of wellness and well-being as a part of a corporate culture in such a way that it encompasses the entire life experience of the employee?
I mean, it goes back to some of the points that we'd raised before. If people feel safe and all of that, they bring their whole self to work. And my definition of whole self is the who I am. I mean, the who I am at home and work, being able to show my real self means that if I feel that on my break time I need to go take a walk, I will go and take a walk or do my stretches or, have my lunch. And it won't be abnormal to people that feel like I should be on a meeting at that particular point in time,
Mhm.
because in the first instance, the culture won't even have allowed someone to put something on my lunchtime, except it was like a critical emergency, and it wouldn't be something that happens every day. So that's one. The second thing is around, at the end of the day, I was chatting with a friend, I think it was like 2 weeks ago now, and she said something that really struck me. She said, "Oh, we keep saying bring your whole self to work. Do you know that when I came to the interview, I didn't bring my whole self? I brought the self that you wanted to see. Means that I dressed professionally, I used language, And she said, I don't know when that time will come. It's not like you're going to have the future where maybe somebody wears a bikini to an interview, right? But the point she's trying to make is that in the first instance, even from the intro, there's already a disconnect. And that's where I feel like organizations have a big part to play, depending on what culture that they're breeding, to ensure that in the onboarding sessions, people understand that this is where you can be yourself, where you can feel safe, and that also the hiring managers and the leaders within the organization are on that same page, right? And so, like I said, it will be different from one organization to another. The culture at a startup is different from the culture at a consulting company. But then for each type, there's room for allowing those things that make me whole as a person. And being whole, going back to where we started from, is emotional, social, mental, physical, intellectual, spiritual, even all of that brought together is what makes me whole. And so if my teams and my organization allow me to be able to experience all those things without feeling that I need to hold something back, then I'm in a better place, right? And that's a hard conversation. It's probably a conversation for another day, because there's so much parts or portions to unpack there. Some people will agree, some people wouldn't. And like I said, it's all dependent on the culture of or the stage of the organization even.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. I think that whole idea of whole self is such an interesting conversation. And so many of us will have I have a work self, I have a home self, I have a this self. And I can't remember what's the word somebody used. I'm going to use mask, but I feel like it was something else, but it was almost like, you
It's
have a
like
different
a veil.
yeah, you have a different mask or a different veil you're putting on constantly. And that gets exhausting because you're just switching from one place to the next and you're not really fully ever kind of with yourself. And that can lead to things like burnout and to other elements from a mental health perspective. I think the idea of also that life cycle of the employee or of the human that's coming to work every day is also linking it to other things like how are you building your policies and what are the benefits that you provide, right? Like everyone wants to say that well-being is more than benefits and more than extra things, but actually all those things kind of go to support, right? So right now, from a policy perspective, we're looking at holistic female policies. From a gender perspective, we're trying to be gender agnostic actually, but we're looking at things like fertility, we're looking at things like the menopause and andropause, which is the male side of it. We've looked at things like bereavement leave and including things like loss of pregnancy. There's loads of these kinds of constructs that you can look at across the life cycle, right? It's understanding that like from sort of a graduate to retirement, there's so many stages that people will go through. And it's in how do your policies and the benefits that you have really go to support that, right? So that's the formal construct that tells someone that if I want to take lifestyle leave for 4 or 5 months because I want to go travel the world, I can. Or if I want to do, I don't know, given the pandemic, I haven't seen my family for 2.5 years. If I want to go and suddenly work from Canada, I can go do that, which I'm about to go do in 2 days. So like if I can do that, then I can go do that for a certain period of the year and have a bit more of that flexibility and autonomy. So I feel like there's something around put the policies and practices and benefits are a way of actually putting what you say into action, because it's giving people the permission to say that, look, these things are there and we believe in it. And that's why we've kind of written it down and formalized it to say that you can definitely build on it and we understand what you need as a result of it.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. I love that framework because it's easy to kind of like focus on one side of the life cycle and forget the other. But if you put that framework in play, you will ensure that you have policies across all the touch points or all the time, or the whole of the timeline, and that you have practices and benefits that support them. And so that's a really good way to look at it.
We are in a very painful, for me at least, moment when we are close to wrapping up our time. I keep telling Enrique that Hacking HR Hours should have more than 60 minutes, but let's try and make the most out of what's left of our time here today. There are two very interesting bits of insight that I picked up along my Hacking HR panel journey. One is from a panel during our conference back in March, where there was a statement made, something along the lines, I am dreaming of a day when reporting on whatever metrics we attach to well-being, wellness, and mental health will be almost mandatory in any type of investor, presentation, ESG reporting. That is one. And the second one was from a panel yesterday when we talked about transparency. And there was a very, very, at least eye-opening for me comment around there is a difference if we refer to transparency as disclosure or whether we refer to transparency as accountability. Now, having these two insights on the table, how would you connect the dots? And then we need to leave 2 minutes for the wrap-up mic drop round of last answers. But please take your time and think about these two: reporting and transparency.
I mean, I'm happy. Felicia, do you want to go?
I was just going to say, Ati will bring her accounting.
I was like, oh, speaking my language. I think reporting breeds transparency, because what it does is it holds that mirror up. But I think that the thing that I have come across in the last few years, like in working in this space in the last 4 or 5 years, the thing that I've definitely seen is that there's a lot of things, like in the UK, we have the Stevenson Farmer Review. There's a report that you can get from the government that basically gives you the list of things you can think about. There's alliances you can join that give you sort of standards that you should be adhering to. And what they do is they require you to report on them. But to your point, Minola, there's no accountability. So it's like I report, and then it's just like great, we got this number, or we got this update. There's no one coming like the police almost to say, right, what are you going to do as a result? And I think sometimes that's where, for me, it's lost. I also believe that there's a place, and it's coming, because you are seeing some governments in different countries starting to instill this idea of well-being reporting. And I've just completed sort of a benchmarking done by one of our investors that definitely calls to play that they are looking at all the media and stuff that we put out there to showcase what we actually share. But actually what none of it does is hold the accountability. So it doesn't come back and say, this is what you're required to do. And as a result of it, we're going to almost police you, and there's a detrimental impact as a result. I'm going to hold you accountable to it. And for me, I really do feel like that is the piece that's missing, because the thing is that organizations are really happy to report, and they will, but because there's no sort of like, there's a repercussion to what you report, there's no real sort of like sense of like, it doesn't really matter. Like, oh, I'll just do it because everyone's doing it. There's two things. One is either they're being benchmarked and it's visible against where they fall against other companies, and no one likes to fall short of their competitors, especially when you're in very high IQ driven organizations. But I think this other element is, what's the governance around making sure that they are holding people to a certain level of account?
Yeah, I will just say that, accountability is the operative word there, because it's one thing to report and be transparent, but to your point, if you can't be held accountable, then it's like people just do it being performative, and then there's no impact. And I think it's important internally within an organization as well as externally. And I like that, a lot of the regulatory bodies are now instilling that things like ESG frameworks and stuff like that are, from a governance perspective, in place within organizations. And I guess we would only see even better reporting and accountability as the years go and as this conversation continues, right? A lot of people are waking up to smell the coffee now, to realize that it's no longer business as usual. To your point, if you're benchmarked openly, then people don't want to be at the bottom of the ladder, or they don't want to be showing red when their competition is showing green, right? I think even internally that helps, because when you put leaders, I don't want to say on the spot, but when you put them in situations where they are almost made to be accountable, or encouraged in a way that they will do it to be accountable, you see results. Like if you now, a lot of organizations are tying these things to performance management. Like it's part of your annual review as a leader. If, say, for example, your team, say from engagement survey, they don't feel safe, or they don't feel like they can grow, and we can reflect that on reporting in general as well.
Thank you so very much, Artie and Felicia, for your generosity of sharing your time and your insights and your experience and your energy and hope. And before we ask Enrique to come back and wrap up today, you've been fairly warned. The last mic drop round. So if you could leave the audience with one key takeaway after our conversation here today, a word or a short sentence, what would that be?
I would say keep this conversation going. People matter, and sometimes that's kind of like lost in the conversation. So just be reminded that we have a part to play in ensuring that our organizations are all by making our people whole.
Thank you.
I would say I would say to add to Felicia's point, it's about connecting the conversation. So connect the conversation so that it doesn't feel like a standalone, and think about the people that you really need to get on top of it, so that they can really help you not just impact business, but the culture of the business and the organization and what it looks and feels like to be an employee every day when you walk into work.
Thank you both so much. Now let's see if Enrique can join us to wrap up the day. There he is.
Not wrap up the day. We have one more panel.
Oh, okay.
Don't got it yet. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, we have one more panel coming up. The last panel of the day and the last panel of the event. We had planned one more day, but we're gonna be moving that day to another date. So for now,
No,
Minola, Artie,
it was me,
Felicia.
master of disaster.
That's all right. All good. All good. Minola, Artie, Felicia, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. This was pretty awesome. Thank you so much. And for everybody who is tuning in right now, in the next, in about 4 or 5 minutes from now, we're going to be kicking off our last panel of the day, which is going to be productivity performance and the quest to deliver the best human experience at work. So stay tuned. We're going to be coming back to you in about 4 minutes. So Minola, Artie, Felicia, have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much.